All right, welcome to this presentation on adolescent development. The focus of this week is learning about typical development within adolescents, as well as what adolescents with disabilities may face in terms of their occupational engagement, and then discussing how we specifically address occupations like IADLs and IEDLs. But this presentation first is going to focus on adolescent development. So after this presentation, you should be able to describe areas of development that mark adolescence, explain differences between adolescents with disabilities and their typically developing peers in regards to participation in chosen areas of occupation, and discuss potential broad OT interventions that may be utilized to address key issues during adolescent development. So how do we define adolescence? It's somewhat difficult to define, but it's generally referred to as the time period between 12 and 18 years of age, and it's marked by an individual preparing themselves for adulthood. Adolescents tend to live in the moment, and they have a tendency to want the security of their family, but also while simultaneously desiring to be viewed as independent and as a young adult. Adolescents begin to develop a sense of identity as they explore different interests and passions, and they also tend to have a strong desire to fit in with their peers. However, it's important to note that the experience of adolescence is not the same universally. In fact, the common characteristics I just shared that are here on the slide are typically a reflection of the American adolescence experience, and so may look very different in other parts of the world. But generally, as they develop, adolescents tend to establish norms and lifestyles that reflect the value and culture of their peers and families. Difficulties with engaging in the roles and tasks of adolescents can lead to potential difficulties with occupational performance as they begin their transition into adulthood. So in terms of physical development and maturation, adolescence is certainly a time of rapid biological and physiological changes. Teens with disabilities generally engage in physical activities that promote their development far less than their typically developing peers, and those teens with congenital issues may experience physical deterioration during this period, which can result in decreased occupational performance. OTs can play a role in helping teens with disabilities to identify opportunities to engage in physical activities, and OTs can provide training to caregivers to deal with the physical changes occurring within their team. It's important to know that adolescence may bring about a feeling of grief for caregivers, as it's yet another life stage in which parents can see typically developing children participating in new roles and activities and becoming more independent in a way that perhaps their teen with a disability cannot. It's important as OTs that we help family members understand that teens with disabilities are still sexual beings and address issues related to sexuality, including teaching the teen to address issues of puberty and develop a healthy body image. So in terms of cognitive and psychosocial development, the quality of an adolescent's thinking changes during adolescence. Piaget referred to this stage of cognitive development as formal operational development, which involves functions such as symbolic thought and hypothetical deductive reasoning. Adolescents develop the ability to have more complex, abstract, and creative thoughts. Their thinking also becomes more organized and adaptable. Development of cognitive abilities helps teens to become more independent in both thought and action. They gain perspective of time and begin to think about and plan for their future. Cognitive development is central to a teen's ability to develop personal, social, moral, and political views. Cognitive development in this time frame also allows teens to better understand the consequences of their actions and better regulate their behaviors. With all this said, it should be evident that teens with cognitive impairments may have difficulties comprehending complex situations and understanding the consequences of their actions. They may lack complex problem-solving abilities and may have difficulty understanding social cues. Academic demands may also become very challenging for individuals with cognitive impairments, which can have a long-term impact on their development and occupational engagement. Psychosocial development is an important aspect of adolescence. During this phase of life, teens begin to establish a sense of identity, as well as formulate sexual orientation, gender identity, and self-concept. The text or the chapter that you're reading for this week expands on each of these concepts in greater detail. Now I'll shift to discussing the different areas of occupation that adolescents engage in and how OTs can address increased occupational performance in each of these areas for teens with disabilities. As I stated earlier, adolescence is a time in which children are preparing to become independent adults. So it's during this time that individuals often begin to engage in work, either through paid employment or volunteer opportunities. OTs can help by providing interventions that develop a teen's work skills and behaviors, as well as helping them to identify their interests, values, and abilities, and then identifying appropriate opportunities for paid employment that match their interests and abilities. In regards to ADLs and IADLs, the other presentation for this week focuses all about ADL and IADL performance in pediatrics, so there'll be even more detail regarding these areas of occupation in that presentation. But generally speaking, teens with disabilities often have the self-determination and emotional or psychological independence needed to engage in ADLs and IADLs, but many still end up depending on their parents. So OTs can really help to enhance a teen's autonomy by providing interventions that can address areas like executive functioning, physical abilities, and emotional regulation so that they can improve their independence with IADL and ADLs. OTs can also play a role in helping parents to quote-unquote let go and allow their teens to exercise more independence with ADL and IADL rather than doing things for them or having really low expectations. With the areas of leisure, play, and social participation, there exists mixed evidence regarding the impact that disability has on teens participating in these areas of occupation. But we know that these issues, issues such as lack of mobility, communication difficulties, emotional regulation problems, cognitive skills, all of these different types of things can impact these areas of occupation. And so can things like lack of accessibility or issues of discrimination. OTs need to consider the various environments that a teenager may engage in and work with the teen, family, and other providers, as well as really with society as a whole, to identify how not only physical environments can support or inhibit occupational engagement, but also to help others understand the nuances that social environments and cultural contexts can have on occupational engagement, and that can thereby influence the types of intervention approaches you use with the adolescent. Lastly, the text shares a few important attributes for any OT that's working with adolescents. So if you're working with teens, it's important to have flexibility, a good sense of humor, capacity to use a strengths-based approach and identify their potential before pointing out their problem areas, an ability to set clear and consistent boundaries, as well as an ability to work really collaboratively with the teen, their caregivers, educators, and other professionals. So that wraps up this overview of adolescent development and the potential roles that OT can play in fostering healthy development and engagement in age-appropriate occupations. Next week, we're going to shift to focusing on the transition to adulthood, and this concept of emerging adulthood, which begins in late adolescence, is the beginning of this transition period, at which point the older adult or the older adolescent begins to think of him or herself as an adult. And this is really an individually and subjectively defined experience. It's one marked by an individual making decisions based on their own beliefs and values, their ability to accept responsibility for their own actions, and establishing more of an equal relationship with their caregivers. As you continue to do the reading and online activities for this week and next, spend some time reflecting on what your own experience of emerging adulthood was like and what factors influence your development and the types of occupations you engaged in. Thanks so much for listening to this presentation. Be sure to post any lingering questions you may have in the optional discussion for this week. Thanks.